My name is Karma, and as you may have noticed from the photo, I like to have fun. I believe learning can take on all kinds of fun and engaging forms, and I'll be your tour guide today on the Constructivism learning theory. So where in the world did Constructivism originate? Well, I am glad you asked. One of the major contributors to this learning theory was John Dewey, an American philosopher and educator. Dewey was born in 1859, and his research and theories were drastically different and challenged the traditional education practices of the time. He posited that practical problem solving and theoretical teaching should go hand in hand. He also coined the term learn by doing. John Dewey's research has had far-reaching ramifications in modern education systems. He sounds like a pretty fabulous founding father, right? Well, sort of. He wasn't perfect by any means, but we'll get into that later. The generation that came after Dewey had major influence on what we now know as Constructivism. And next up on our world tour, we are headed to Eastern Europe. Meet Lev Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist born in 1896. Vygotsky developed his sociocultural theory of learning amidst a time of revolution and upheaval in his country. He is considered a formative thinker in educational psychology. Vygotsky believed that human learning is largely a social process and that the culture around us helps shape our understanding and cognitive development. Importantly, he recognized that people develop differently depending on the cultural context in which they live. This is a sharp contrast to the theories developed by one of his peers of the day, Jean Piaget, who we will meet next. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist also born in 1896. He studied cognitive development and discovered that children learn actively. They don't sit around waiting for their heads to be filled with knowledge. He felt the best way to understand how a child thinks is to see the world from their perspective. Piaget's assumptions help form the foundation of his cognitive development theory, which states each child goes through the stages in the same order, and child development is determined by biological maturation and interaction with the environment. Unfortunately, a lot of Piaget's research has been debunked over time, but again, more on that later. Our world travels through time, space, and learning theory history have almost come to an end. We have one more stop to make and one final main theorist to review. Meet Jerome Bruner. Born in 1915, Bruner is described as a revolutionary in the field of psychology, emphasizing learning through interpersonal interactions and exploring such topics as how we gain meaning through those interactions, as well as how the mind deals with the limited information it is given. Jerome Bruner's life spanned a full century. His contributions to academia crossed over decades, and they're much more expansive than we have time to explore today. I do think it's important to recognize that Bruner drew on Vygotsky's sociocultural theory and expanded on those theories in his own research. Our modern education system has developed many practical applications as a result of these two theorists' work. For example, Bruner coined the term scaffolding, a process where the teacher provides specific prompts to move the child progressively forward. But in terms of real application, we also see evidence of Bruner's influence on constructivist learning theory all throughout our BC provincial K-12 curriculum. And that's just one example. So we can see from this quick trip through history that constructivism is not really a specific pedagogy or andragogy, but it's a learning theory founded in psychology and actually very diverse psychology and theories that have been compiled over time. Constructivism has been shaped by the diverse work of these main theorists over a span of more than 150 years, and their research provided the foundation on which educational reforms were built. So what are the practical implications of constructivism on the learner and the educator? Well, let's find out. Constructivism flips the script, so to speak, on traditional education practices that are based on behaviorism. In constructivism, learners are active participants. They're involved in their own process of learning. They share authority and knowledge with their instructor, and their interests and questions are valued. Learners are engaged, they have hands-on opportunities to learn, they have a say in outcomes, and how as a learner they will get there or be able to show what they know. Educators, on the other hand, take on a more dynamic role as facilitators, coming alongside learners and helping them construct knowledge rather than simply sharing information and passive listeners. There's more opportunity for dialogue, interaction, and the ability for all voices to be heard. And as with all theories, nothing is perfect and there is always opportunity to improve. So let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of constructivism. On the pro side, constructivism focuses on active learning rather than passive listening. It's an interactive process. It supports the development not just of learning more, but also that we learn how to learn or enjoy the learning that we're doing. With respect to practical applications, constructivist learning is transferable. And so taking what we've learned and applying in new environments is beneficial to us as learners, but also the society that we are a part of. We also develop resiliency and the ability to adapt. Learners in a constructivist learning environment recognize that learning is dynamic and they are better able to adapt to new and changing situations. Now, for the cons. Constructivism is composed of a multitude of theories, some of which have not aged well or have even been disproved over time. For example, Piaget's theory that cognitive development is universal did not take into consideration social or cultural contexts, demographics, and more. According to one journal article, despite the recognition that Piaget's theory received, some serious doubts were raised, grounded in robust empirical data about the universal attainment of formal thought. In other words, while parts of Piaget's theories have been correct, like children are active learners within their environment, his ideas around universality of cognitive development were lacking. And then there's the ugly side of constructivism's history, the impacts of colonialism. For example, John Dewey's Democracy in Education is rife with colonial misconceptions about intelligence being dependent on race, culture, and place of origin. The antiquated and offensive language is off-putting at best, but at worst, it perpetuates harmful misconceptions to entire people groups. Viewing Dewey's learning theory through modern lens, we must be aware of and intentional in our efforts to decolonize the language and ideas. I believe we can learn by doing without doing harm, but it requires us to become more progressive in our thinking than Dewey was in his day. So thank you for joining me on this brief tour of constructivism. The references used are linked in the description below, along with some additional resources that I think you might find interesting. You can follow my adventures in learning on my PIDP student blog, which is also linked in the description below. Thank you for taking the time to learn with me.